Hello, everybody. I think I'm streaming live. I'm waiting for my computer to bring up YouTube and confirm that. Thank you for tuning in, everybody who is here. I'm going to be speaking with Ben Shapiro in a little bit, but first, make sure this is working. Mute myself. Hello, hello. People are saying they just left his show. Yeah, he gets up bright and early. He is quite the accomplished workhorse. He gets his show done by 9 a.m. Pacific time on weekdays. Zach over there in the YouTube chat says, I've been spamming Twitter and drinking coffee. Very good. I have decaf. Why? Because if you're going to talk with Ben Shapiro, I don't think you need any more than the 1 cup of caffeine that you start out the day with. So that's what I've had. Okay, yeah, everything seems like it's working fine. So that's good. And then the next hurdle is the dial-in. Make sure that the dial-in works well. But I assume the audio is smooth and everything. I restarted my computer this morning. The glitches that I had last week, I don't think we should have, because as you saw last week, if you tuned in for my little system check, once I restarted, everything was smooth. So I did it again this morning just to make sure. I was telling some people on Facebook that I had a dream last night, and it was that instead of doing an online show where Ben Shapiro was my guest, instead I was teaching a class like at a university, which I've done a lot of times in my life. And he was going to be my guest in the class. And in the dream, I showed up in the class, about the time that the class was about to start. And he'd already been there for I don't know how long, but he had just commandeered the whole class. He took over and he'd given his presentation already. And I had no time to record or ask any questions. And he was gone. That was it. It was the funniest. Anyway, so you can tell, you get to talk to Ben Shapiro. It's quite an honor. And you can get a little bit nervous. I'm going to go ahead right now, actually, and give you the formal introduction of Ben Shapiro. Probably everybody here knows exactly who he is, but just in case, I want to go ahead and do that and get that out of the way, because when he calls, he's not going to have a lot of time for me. I'm small fry, right? Those of you who are watching me here on YouTube right now, or even when you watch a recording later, you're going to see my number of subscribers is low. I had somebody on Twitter the other day when Ben actually retweeted my announcement of the show. The guy says, the dozens of your listeners are going to be thrilled, or something like that. And yeah, okay, I'm small fry. He's giving me some time. He's giving me limited time. I'm going to try to make the best of it. So let me give you his introduction now. Ben Shapiro is a renowned conservative political pundit. This is from his YouTube, by the way. Syndicated columnist, lawyer, New York Times bestselling author. I heard that this book, actually, that we're going to discuss, The Right Side of History, has gone #1 on Amazon, #1 bestseller on Amazon. So sold a lot of books as well. Editor-in-chief of The Daily Wire, host of the popular video podcast, The Ben Shapiro Show, which you can watch here on YouTube. So there's the formal introduction. Let me tell you a little bit about the book. Oh, David in the chat over here at YouTube says, I think with honor, it's a two-way street, I hope. Again, I'm really small fry. The one honor that I have with respect to him, and it's very interesting, and I'm not going to waste time asking him about it, but I have wondered. He follows me on Twitter. Well, why? Now, I met him for the very first time about, I think it was fall 2011 at an event. And at that time, I didn't really know who he was. I guess he was more, sort of emerging as a popular commentator at that point. And I had a conversation with him, and he and I are both attorneys. And I remember the main topic that we discussed, and I can't remember why we got to it, but it was the exclusionary rule. And I don't know if you're familiar with the exclusionary rule in law, but it's a rule of the application of the Fourth Amendment. And it emerged, I guess, probably in the 1960s is when it actually was put into place by the Supreme Court. And what the court said is that if a search was conducted in violation of the Fourth Amendment, then the evidence that were the fruits of that search would be excluded in a prosecution against a criminal defendant. And I disagreed with that. And I think I remember the thing that I discussed with him was that traditionally, there was not an exclusionary rule, and the traditional meaning of the Fourth Amendment and application of the Fourth Amendment entailed, instead of using that exclusionary rule, you would prosecute the police officers for trespass, right? Trespass on property. Because that's what they've done. They have trespassed on your property if they have entered your property or searched your property without a proper warrant based on probable cause and particularized suspicion. So I think what I did is referred him to the book by Professor Akhil Amar years ago when I was a research assistant for Leonard Peikoff. Leonard Peikoff, by the way, not my father, was my ex. I get that mistake all the time. But anyway, I had been a research assistant on his radio show years ago. I read Akhil Amar's book, marked it all up, got prepared. We interviewed Akhil Amar for that show. And I was a big fan, and I love that theory. That theory helped me in my thinking on privacy theory, which I've got some interesting things to say if I can finish my own book on it. So obviously I was very enthusiastic about it. I had a discussion with him. I guess that made an impression on him, and that's why he's followed me. So that's the honor I have also, is that he follows me. And, in terms of him being honored to speak to me, I don't, maybe someday when I prove myself with a book, that could be the case. But anyway, let me tell you about his book. So his book is called, and you've probably heard a lot about it, The Right Side of History: How Reason and Moral Purpose Made the West Great. And you've probably heard him talk about it, but let me reiterate what he starts sort of with a mystery. He says, why is it in society today that there is so much division, so much discord, to use AOC had a tweet the other day about discord. She's sowing discord between the so-called working classes and billionaires. But in the meantime, she's complaining about the billionaires fueling discord. She's very hypocritical about this. But anyway, why is there so much anger and discord in society? And he goes through in the introduction some of the causes you might think that would be responsible. Income inequality, and he dismisses that. He says, is it about racism, sexism, any of these other things? No, it's not about this. And he comes to the, sort of kind of hypothetical conclusion in the introduction he's going to play out through the book and show you, which is that we no longer understand properly the meaning of Western civilization. And so now we have people who are upholding it on improper grounds and then also rejecting it on improper grounds. And he says, if you want to understand Western civilization properly, you have to understand it as resting on what he calls the twin pillars of Jerusalem and Athens. Jerusalem meaning the Judeo-Christian religious tradition, and Athens meaning the Greek philosophical tradition that upholds reason in particular is his main focus, of bringing in Athens, reason and science, etc. So he thinks that if we can recover a proper understanding of Western civilization based on these twin pillars, then we can see that Western civilization is not, as some people improperly understand it, it is not some sort of a hierarchy based on invalid, inessential characteristics such as race and income and things like that. So that's his thesis. And people who have followed me before and know me know that I'm an atheist, that I'm an objectivist, that I, believe that Ayn Rand's philosophy is true, regardless of, I have, maybe some quibbles with her own application of her own philosophy with respect to homosexuality and some other minor issues. But, I consider myself to be an objectivist and an atheist in particular. And so you can imagine that when I get to talk to him for a limited period of time, I want to press him on the inclusion of Jerusalem as one of the twin pillars, Jerusalem, as he puts it, religion, and just press him. Is it really necessary? Or if we have an understanding of reason, a proper understanding of reason and its role in human life, would that be adequate? So there's your spoiler alert, but the interesting thing will be, what does he have to say about it? And, in particular, I would bring up I think the best strain of Athenian philosophy is, of course, Aristotle. If you're on my YouTube channel and you look at the headline on the YouTube channel, I have this great graphic that a friend from some years ago had made for me. It was, I mean, it was really a brilliant idea that he had, but it was that you've got, of course, in philosophical tradition, the eternal duel between Plato and Aristotle, which was set up in Athens, right? The duel. And if you look at the School of Athens, the famous painting by Raphael, Raphael has Aristotle putting his hand like this to say, basically, kind of the subject of philosophy and the focus for human beings is this world. Everything is this worldly. And Plato's pointing up to the world of the forms that, essentially the good can be found in a higher dimension, this is what Plato's saying. And so this eternal tension between Aristotle saying, no, the good for human beings is here on this earth, and Plato saying, no, it's in another higher dimension. I embrace the Aristotelian strain, the Aristotelian side of that dichotomy. And in my logo that I've got, the traditional logo for this show that I've had, Don't Let It Go Unheard, you have Aristotle just using a bullhorn and saying to Plato, no, it's about this world. It's everything can be understood properly in this world. And of course, Aristotle had some errors in his own philosophy, but I do think that Rand has done a lot to develop and correct those errors. And I don't know of any fundamental error that Rand has made. Maybe someday somebody's going to point that out, but I have no reason to think that there is. It would be arbitrary to say that there is. But I think that is a development on the Aristotelian tradition that has the potential to do all the work that Ben talks about needing to be done in this book, the work that needs to be done to shore up a proper understanding of Western civilization. So that's the place where I'm coming from. I'm pretty sure that he knows when he's coming here that I'm going to give him a question like that. It's not like I'm going to be springing anything on him. I have a different way of asking it, and you'll see what that is in a minute. So that's where the not a total spoiler happens. So Runaway Susie over in the chat says, I love that painting, Raphael, School of Athens. Yeah, I'm actually in the process of downsizing. I have too many things hanging on my walls and stuff, and I've auctioned a couple things on eBay and stuff. But one of the things I'm definitely keeping is my copy of Raphael's School of Athens. It's a beautiful thing. Susie also says, he's a very smart and hardworking guy, tries his best to pursue the truth. Yes, I believe that. And there's two reactions that I've gotten when I was going to have Ben Shapiro on the show. One was, well, why are you interviewing him? Why is not somebody else interviewing him? And then the other one is, why are you interviewing him? So anyway, it should be fun. So yeah. So see Ken over here in the chat, when will Shapiro versus Yaron happen? I don't know. Yeah, it would be good to see that debate. I'm happy to be able to speak to him myself as well. So we'll see how that goes. What'll happen is he's going to dial in by phone. And so I've got a little participant window that should tell me when he's joined. It should be in about a minute. So I'll take a sip of coffee, wait on it. Someone in the chat room says, I need to get on my other account. Is it because he wants to troll a little or something? I don't know. Awesome. Yeah, AI is going to figure out we're going to be 10 times smarter than us in a couple decades. I can do super chat now. I don't know if I can do super chat yet, actually, because they have not only a subscriber count limit, but a number of hours. And I need to be a workhorse like Ben and broadcast for more hours so that I get my hour count up enough. I'm close. So I'm going to do it soon. Oh, thanks for subscribing. That'd be great. Definitely. While you're here, if you hit subscribe, I will love it. It will help. And of course, check out the other content. I've been a guest on Tucker. I'm small fry, but I've been a guest on Tucker now, I think 7 times. And I've got a couple of clips of those here on my YouTube channel that you can check out. And those are interesting. And I think most of Ben's audience would agree with what I've done on Tucker. So let me see. He should be calling in any second. Let's hope it works. Had it work the other day. I'm watching my participant window avidly. Okay. Sorry, you guys, dead air time. Waiting. I'm hoping it's working. Let me see if I'm getting any messages telling me that there's a technical difficulty or something. The other possibility, of course, is it's April Fool's. He's going to say, ha, April Fool's, I'm not calling in to your show. Because now we're a minute late, right? And that would not be good. Yeah, I haven't seen anything. Okay, no. I'm still not seeing anything. Let me see if I get an email telling me there's an issue. I've had email correspondence with the scheduler. Not seeing anything. Okay. No. Hmm. 21 seconds. He's tweeting. Maybe he got distracted by AOC and is tweeting her. Yeah, mine says he's probably just a little busy. Yeah, I think he's quite busy. Yeah, exactly. Ben, where are you? People are saying, come on, call in. Okay. Last tweet a minute ago. Hope. Ah, here he comes. Okay, excellent. Let me unmute him. Hello, Ben. Is that
Amy,
you?
how's it going?
Hi.
It is. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you for calling in. Now, you and I, Ben, I was telling the audience, we have basically the same goal. We want to make the world a better place by saving what we each see as the values of Western civilization. And we both believe that that entails some of the same things: free will, meaning, individualism to a certain extent, individual rights. But obviously there are differences given that you're religious and I'm an atheist. So quickly, because you've given me just limited time, I want to explore some of that difference, okay?
Sure. So I think that go ahead.
Well, okay, yeah. So let me set up the question and then I'll just let you go because we might get only to this one question, okay?
Sounds good.
On page 181 of your book, you have this great metaphor. And you say Western civilization is a bridge suspended over the waters of chaos. Removing that tension collapses that bridge into the roiling river below, end quote. Now, this is very powerful, but I'm going to challenge it, okay? So
Sure.
let's say you're right. Let's say that as a matter of fact, this is how Western civilization developed. Religion was a necessary part of the progression, at least as a foil. And suppose it could not have even been otherwise, because religion is a natural way for human beings to start understanding the world around them. Even if those two are true, that doesn't mean that this is the understanding that we must or should retain going forward. We can, at least I think, reject faith and embrace reason properly understood and lead good lives. And the Aristotelian tradition, which is best developed, no surprise, in my opinion, by Ayn Rand, shows a way of doing this. And yet the only mention you've got of Rand in your book is to say that she was a paramour of Nathaniel Branden, which it's kind of ad hominem, and a lot of objectivists don't even agree with Rand's decision to have that affair anyway. So really, I think you haven't addressed what I see as the best challenge to your contention that Jerusalem is a necessary adjunct to Athens going forward, at least.
Sure. Okay. So obviously if I wanted to write a book about, what I thought of Ayn Rand, there'd be a lot there that I really like. I mean, I think that Ayn Rand's take on human creativity and capitalism is spot on. I've praised objectivism in its defense of free markets for years. The kind of aside about Rand is less about trying to rip Rand than it is about trying to place Nathaniel Brand in sort of the context of his time. So that was not meant to be a slap at Ayn Rand per se.
Okay.
I think I give Brandon a pretty lengthy treatment on his own merit, so it really has nothing to do with Rand. As far as the contention that faith is still necessary as part of this balance, what I would suggest is that attempts to move beyond the fundamental preconceptions of faith, these sort of assumptions that we build into the reasonable system, have tended to collapse in on themselves. So I suggest, for example, that, and you and I agree, that human reason exists. So let's start with that. So where does human reason come from in an atheistic worldview? What does reason do? What does that even mean? So from a sort of religious, faith-based, or at least Aristotelian unmoved mover perspective, reason is the capacity of human beings to make a decision otherwise using logic and in search of objective truth. That's using a lot of terminology that doesn't exist in scientific materialism. So in the scientific materialist worldview,
I was going to say, you don't have to be a scientific materialist to be an atheist, right?
Well, maybe. I mean, so here's my question to you. Is that true? How can do you support the idea of free will and reason based on what exactly? Like, well, what is the animating force behind free will and reason?
Well, free will is something that we experience directly by introspection. And free will is also axiomatic, as Aristotle demonstrated, way back in ancient Greece, as a foundation for all argument. So actually, any argument purporting to demonstrate that there is no free will is self-refuting. I mean, it's axiomatic. We experience it directly by introspection. And to me, that is plenty. In terms of how do we explain it as an emergent property of, our physical bodies and the life force that we have in us, that's fine. But I would take it just as is. I don't think that it has to have an otherworldly origin. Yeah.
Well, the point that I'm making is, I think in that second step, where does it come from? To have a faith-based component, I think, is necessary. But beyond that, you can argue for the necessity of reason to building a system, which you and I totally agree on. But the question is where that reason comes from, and it to me seems a faith-based assumption that is necessary in order to build that system. And when I say faith, I don't even mean in God. I mean, you're making an assumption that is necessary to reach the conclusion you want to reach, but is not necessarily true. Meaning there are lots of people who don't make that assumption, right? Sam Harris doesn't make that assumption. He opposes that assumption. He's obviously a pretty militant atheist. So it is not necessary that all atheists believe the way that you do. It is necessary, I think, to make a logical leap to the idea of human reason and free will in order to build anything. And right. I don't know how you can do that solely on the basis of human logic alone.
Well, and what I think, and I don't know if you've ever read it, there is one essay that I would refer to you just because it's a single essay and it might give you an idea of a secular foundation for a lot of the things that you care about. It's called the Objectivist Ethics. It's available online. They distribute it free from the Ayn Rand Institute and everything. And it's a talk that Rand gave at a philosophy department in Wisconsin in the 60s or something. It's a rigorous presentation of a secular foundation for all of these things that you're concerned about. Objectivism has a really rich understanding of the virtue of honesty, for example, honesty as self-interested, not as this out of context duty that you describe in your book when you talk about Kant's understanding of honesty, for example. There's a lot of richness in there that you might be surprised that you could get. That's all I want to say.
Oh, no, I mean, no, listen, I'm always happy to read more Rand. I've told you, I really enjoy reading Rand and I find her really interesting. My chief critiques of Rand have to do more with the capacity to build a moral system for a huge number of people based on her understanding of self-interest, meaning that, to take her fiction examples, which I know better, obviously, than her nonfiction. I've read some of her nonfiction, but you're much more well-read in Rand than I am. One of the things that is difficult in her fiction is that there are no children anywhere. Children immediately draw you out of the realm of rational self-interest to a certain extent. Now, I understand that, and I've had conversations with objectivists in which they say, but your self-interest is to take care of your child.
Yes.
And I suppose that if you expand the definition of self-interest to include that which you do not want to do, then that, I guess, encompasses something. But I think then we are sort of arguing
semantics. Why would you not want to take care of your children, though? I mean, they're your children.
Well, there are literally millions of people. There are literally millions of people who don't. There are literally millions of men who abandon their children. And is that self-interest? Is that self-interested? Is that sort of self-interest morally justifiable? My problem with the Randian system is so why?
Out.
On what basis? Well, how do you make that judgment for them? That is their self-interest. That's really where I have my biggest problem with Ryan's philosophy.
Well, I think that if we were able to sit down and have a longer conversation about a lot of these concrete examples where you couldn't see why it was in somebody's self-interest to do XYZ, we could certainly do that. But like I said, there's a lot of things that surprise people, like the gloss of honesty as completely self-interested versus a duty to somebody else and things like that. That's can be very rich based on a foundation of reason. But anyway, so I see you and I are allies because we agree on free will. We agree on the fact that there needs to be meaning. It's just, I bring it from a secular perspective and you bring it from the religious.
Yeah, 100%. And as I've said, like I say in the book that, when I say that there are people who are allies in this fight, they don't all have to be religious, but we all have to make the same core assumptions about the things that you're talking about. I think those assumptions are more fundamentally grounded in religious faith. You think that you can ground those in secular reason. I have my doubts about that, and you have your doubts about my system, but I think that historically speaking, typically Western civilization has founded it in religious faith because in the end, I do think that it does require that logical jump from a scientific materialist worldview to free will. Again, I have a hard time getting to, and I'll read the essay. Please send me the essay that you're referring to because I'd love to read it. I haven't seen a really convincing case to jump from the scientific materialism that I think is endemic to a true atheism to a reason-based free will-based system.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give you the last word now because we're at the end of the time that you promised me, but I hope at some point we can continue to the discussion. So
yeah, I love it. I mean, the reason I've joined you is because I'm always interested in your ideas. I think you're an interesting thinker, so I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks. Be well.
You too. Okay, you guys. So he promised me 10 minutes and that's what I took of his time. So this is what I got. Good little interchange. I didn't bring up the quotation about the garbage, but I don't think it was necessary given the way that the discussion went. What do you think? No, I was very happy to have him there, and then hopefully we can talk some more. I do think maybe if I send him the essay, and I think I might also point him, there is a recent discussion that Onkar Ghate, I believe, had from the Ayn Rand Institute. Onkar Ghate had with Dave Rubin as part of that series that they did, the ARI series. I haven't been able to watch the series. I saw one clip from the series so far, and it was Gina Gorlin talking about love, which was a really nice little clip. But I wanted to take a look at that, what Onkar Ghate said with Dave Rubin about the issue of free will. Ben, I think, has some valid concerns, but I do wish that he had read, some more Rand, because I think that there is a respectable foundation there. One thing I would have pressed him on if I had more time, and it was in my mind and I wanted to press it. No, I have to give him the last word. He's my guest and he was nice to give me his time. In his book, there is a discussion of the women's suffragette movement. And he talks about a woman, I can't remember her name, and sorry, I'm not a super scholarly type people. So, read the book and I have a lot of things, that I remember and can talk about, but I don't remember this woman's name. Anyway, a suffragette who was also an atheist. And so she wrote a book making her case for the, women's right to vote on an atheist foundation. And the one thing that Ben says in there is that, well, once people knew she was an atheist, basically she didn't have any influence anymore. And if you listen to him when he was talking there, he said that he was skeptical about an atheistic philosophy, a secular philosophy, being able to influence a lot of people, right? And so to me, that has sort of a tone, and I have to press him. Again, we have a bit limited time. has sort of a tone of, oh, well, the masses need religion or something. And he can't think that. I mean, he's a really smart guy and he believes in religion. So it's not just like, oh, the masses need religion. He thinks it's the right view. And so we'd have to kind of explore that a little bit more. What else would I press him on? Oh, one question that a friend of mine raised, and it would have been interesting to ask him, which is, where does he believe Trump falls in the understanding of these twin pillars, Jerusalem and Athens, right? Where does Trump fit on the continuum with the pillars, the tension, the bridge? How does it all work? Who knows where Trump is? In general, I see Ben as being more favorable about Trump than I am. I criticize Trump a lot more than he does. He criticizes Trump some, to his credit, which is good. He's not, like the kind of the Breitbart or anything that's just out there touting Trump all the time. So that's excellent. But I do think that I'm way more critical of Trump. And it would be fun just to discuss Trump in general. My foundational criticism of Trump is that Trump is a pragmatist, that Trump has no understanding that he demonstrates or that he's animated by of the foundational principles of our country. And whereas you could say, okay, well, sometimes he does things that are good, I don't see them as anything that come from a principle that he's acting on. And so therefore you can't predict or count on what he's going to do next. But there's a number of points that I had that I would have brought up with him. Like I said, the virtue of honesty for Rand, and I didn't want to go into much detail, but just to give people, if you were intrigued by that, a little bit of an idea, I would present the virtue of honesty, for example, to my legal ethics students when I was teaching at Southwestern Law School. The idea that you can have honesty that is self-interested, that is not some duty either to God or to other people, et cetera, you owe it to others. For Rand, honesty, the virtue of honesty, practicing the virtue of honesty is necessary for the function of your reasoning mind. And of course, Ben sees the value of reason. Reason for Rand, and this is where you get this secular foundation for an ethics, reason for Rand is our means of survival. We face, as human beings, as every other living thing on the planet, a life and death alternative. And if we want to choose to stay alive, then we have to do it living as the type of beings that we are. And that requires using our reason to produce the values that we need to sustain our life. And therefore, anything that is required for the proper functioning and the better improved functioning of human reason gets baked into the equation. One of those things is the virtue of honesty. And so honesty means for Rand, and I'll contrast it. If you've read his book, he does have a great little aside critiquing Kant's understanding of honesty. So Kant just says you have to be honest all the time. Why? It's a categorical imperative. You act only on that rule that you could wish to be a universal law. And, if you aren't honest all the time, then therefore you're basically giving permission for everybody else to be dishonest all the time. You couldn't consistently will that everybody is out there just being dishonest all the time. So you have to be honest all the time. And a very classical example that's brought up as a challenge to this is, if the Nazis come to your door and you're in one of the countries, where the Nazis are occupying or invading, they're trying to take Jews off to concentration camps. Do you tell the truth about where the Jews are hiding in your house, or can you lie to them? And for Kant, really, to be consistent, you'd have to say, no, you have to tell the truth and give up the Jews and let them be hauled off to the concentration camps and the gas chambers, which is a horrible thing. But for Rand understands honesty as never faking reality in order to obtain a value. Never faking reality in order to obtain a value. And the reason that you would not want to fake reality is because it is very important for you to keep your rational faculty in proper contact with reality all the time so that you can act within reality to achieve the values that you need to sustain your life. And So any disconnect that you have, that you are willfully deciding to disconnect from reality, you are threatening that connection that you have, and you're putting that at risk. You're putting your abilities to sustain your life at risk. So, go back to the Nazi example. If you think about that, there are these situations in which values of yours are threatened by an unjust attack. So this could be that real sort of dire example, or it could just be, you've got a nosy coworker who's asking you very personal questions, and they're asking them in a way that if you don't answer no, for example, in a way that is believable, right? If you don't actually lie about something, then you're giving away something very personal that that person has absolutely no right to know about, right? Sorry, I got distracted by a comment in the chat room there. Yeah, so there's a number of examples where a value of yours is being subjected to an unjust attack. And like I said, it's not just the Nazi. There's another example of, the axe murderer comes to the door and, you're babysitting and it's like, where are the children? You say third door on the right. No, you don't do this, right? You realize, but it's hard, I think, to make that, sort of application in certain circumstances. You have to be very clear in those circumstances that you are not, faking reality in order to obtain a value. Instead, what you're doing is you are protecting a value from an unjustified attack. And that, stating an untruth in that moment is required in order to protect that value. You want to be very vigilant about doing it only insofar as required in that situation, so that you can always retain that contact. So that's how you handle the situation that he talks, that he raises in the book. I can't remember what page it's on. I have a photographic type memory, so I remember it was on one of the left-hand side pages, but I don't have a page site. But it was cool that he brought that up. He brought up a lot of the tradition. In general, I got the feeling, and this is when I was reading his presentation of Plato versus Aristotle in the beginning, that he makes Aristotle seem a little more Platonic in a certain way in terms of granting Aristotle attributing to Aristotle a larger role for the so-called unmoved mover than I understood from, listening to people who have taught Aristotle to me. I understood that it was a fairly minor role for Aristotle, that any sort of other dimension or, something outside of this world plays a lot bigger role in Plato. And of course, I've read my Plato too. I taught Plato and Aristotle at the Air Force Academy, but I only taught, basically, Plato, the standard things about justice and the world of forms and the myth of the cave and all of that. And with Aristotle, we just focused on the ethics, Nicomachean ethics. So I've got limited experience teaching Plato and Aristotle myself. I've learned some things about the foundations of their philosophies from other, but, Plato, of course, had a huge role in his philosophy for another dimension, a higher dimension, a superior dimension. For Aristotle, any role that he attributed to something outside this world, it was, sort of like Thomas Jefferson's deism. It just didn't play as big a role. My impression is that Ben sort of lumped Aristotle in with Plato more than I have seen traditionally along those dimensions, making it natural to add Jerusalem to the pillar of, Athens, right? That it would seem like it would belong. It's a proper complement to Aristotle's philosophy to add religion to it. I think if you go and look at some different types of interpretation of Aristotle that again minimize the role of the unmoved mover in Aristotelian thought, that you wouldn't see adding religion as a natural adjunct as much. The other thing that he talks about with respect to those two is he thinks that you need to have Jerusalem because he believes that religion provides a foundation for individualism. in a way that Greek philosophy doesn't, that Christianity attributed a value to the individual human being because each individual human being is made in the image of God and God values you and everything. So that's how there's individual worth. And he describes Greek philosophy by contrast as being collectivistic. And in my study of those two, and again, it's been years, I'd have to go back, but I'll give you a reference in a second. He's talking in particular about the politics, that the politics of Greek philosophy is very collectivistic. And of course, they did have democracy, which was rule by the majority. Democracy literally is rule by the majority. But in my understanding, Plato is a lot more collectivistic than Aristotle. Perhaps Aristotle more collectivistic than Rand, for example, or Locke even. But there is a book, and I haven't been able to go back and look at it. I think I saw a presentation on this book by a philosopher named Robert Mayhew. He's one of my favorite objectivists. And he wrote a book that is, I believe, Aristotle's critique of Plato's politics. And I think that if you go in there, you're going to see more of a contrast between Aristotle and Plato on politics than would be evident in the treatment of Aristotle and Plato in Ben's book. So that's another reference to look at. Another reference that I would give you guys, just to, again, challenge. I'm always challenging this addition of Jerusalem to the mix. And it's not that, so, what if I had my ideal society? Would I not welcome religious people into my, no, of course. I just think religion should be a private matter, that we shouldn't bake anything that's based solely on religion into politics, and that people should just be free to go about their lives. There's a great quotation from Rand where she says that in, sort of an atheistic based government, people with religion would still be welcoming as long as your religious practice doesn't require the violation of somebody else's individual rights. Everybody can go about their business, right? But if you have a society that's founded on religion, a theocracy, then that would necessarily exclude atheists. Atheists would be excluded. But so I think, we have a potential to include a lot more. But let me press that line a little bit more. So, oh yeah, there was one other place. Yeah, there was one other thing I wanted to refer you guys to. So Ben talks about the founding of our country and how there was such a religious foundation at the founding of our country. Years ago, again, probably 2 decades ago, I think, there was a book called The Godless Constitution. And in that book, there's a whole systematic questioning of how central the role of religion actually was in our founding. And of course, as the title gives away, really it wasn't. The founding fathers were deists and they didn't rely upon religion as much. There's also an excerpt from Leonard Peikoff's his last book, The Dim Hypothesis, his last nonfiction book. I think he's working on some fiction. And he talks about the fact that the foundation of the United States is secular. And that is an excerpt that I originally pulled for a book called Textbook of Americanism, New Textbook of Americanism, that Jonathan Hoenig has released. So you could take a look at that as well. So those are the things that I had to say. Let me go here in the chat room. Zach says, if any of you haven't, you really should go watch ARI's online campus and watch Leonard Peikoff's History of Philosophy course. Lots of stuff about Aristotle and Plato. Yeah. And Heraclitus and all kinds of wonderful Greek philosophy is there as well. Fab says, wait a second, what? He treats Brandon at length, but not Rand. He doesn't treat Brandon at a lot of length. Trying to think of what page it's on. It's on the right-hand side. You know me. Well, you don't know me, but I told you that. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so it's on page 195 that he mentions Brandon. And he's talking about the self-esteem movement in general, and he talks about Spock, and he talks about Maslow, and who's the other figure that he talks about as well? I guess just Maslow and Spock is what the ones he's lumping Brandon in with. Brandon, I'm not a fan of Brandon myself, but you know, the stuff that he did on self-esteem is not the same as Maslow and Spock. Again, it's going to be based on a foundation that has a rich ethics behind it, that you would be entitled to self-esteem. Having self-esteem relies upon your practice of very rigorous virtues, like the honesty that I described. I'm not going to go into more here. So, as much as I don't like Brandon, I don't think that any gloss that he had of self-esteem and the psychology of self-esteem is that bad. And certainly, I don't know that you should necessarily lump it in there. But he said it's about a paragraph or two. So it's not a long presentation. And I mean, one thing that is true is that, you can't just take self-esteem out of context as a value and hope that it's going to do any good work at saving Western civilization. That is certainly true. And Brandon, I do think, had, some problems and issues. And you can read his other books where, I mean, basically he attacked Rand posthumously without her being able to respond, which I thought was not a good thing. But anyway, he talks about Brandon attacking the doctrine of original sin and argued that the will to understand could grant purpose. Now, the way that I would look at purpose or meaning in life, there's actually, again, in that series that a number of thinkers from the Ayn Rand Institute did with Dave Rubin, there's a whole discussion on meaning. How do you have meaning in life according to a secular ethics, the objectivist ethics? And meaning for human life would be centered around what we would call a central purpose for the good life. And the central purpose for a good life for human beings would be the production of values, life-sustaining values. There's a lot of richness around that. So, for example, there's an essential role for art and romantic love and everything that's going to help human reason function better. So there's plenty there, but it's not a lengthy treatment of Brandon. He mentions a couple paragraphs, but it's not like he's short shrifted compared to other thinkers in the book either. The ones that I think he probably spent the most time on more were Plato and Aristotle as he goes through the foundations, but there's a number of thinkers that he just gave a paragraph or two, but it is a tour de force in terms of a survey. And he has quite a breadth of knowledge of a lot of different thinkers that I don't, for example. And so there is a, is it Quillette? Is that the way that you pronounce Quillette is the review. Quillette published a review of the book. And there were a couple of concrete examples that the reviewer brought up that he was familiar with. Like I said, I had to draw upon my knowledge of Plato and Aristotle to sort of weigh what I read in the book against that. And of course, the omission of Rand, to me, I see as one that is not necessarily justified, because I don't think you can say that using reason alone has failed to provide a proper foundation for Western civilization if you haven't examined the full foundation of Rand's philosophy and the things that he has natural concerns based on what he understands scientific materialism to be the foundation for free will and reason. How do you explain reason? How much do you have to explain it? And there's all these things that we could talk about. But Paul in the chat says the book that I mentioned about the Constitution, it's called The Godless Constitution, A Moral Defense of the Secular State by Isaac Kramnik and Lawrence Moore. Yeah, so that book, of course, came to mind. Dr. Iscope says, hi, Dr. Iscope. He's testing there. Yeah, maybe Ben will cite some Rand if he does some more reading. Yes, that would be great. It's funny. I don't see that he should necessarily be hostile to that idea at all. But it is interesting. And when he talks about the suffragists, I wish I could find that discussion. He says essentially that we atheists, we are going to have to make common cause with religious people. And that's another place. I mean, obviously he's treating me as a potential ally by even coming on the show, which is great. And yeah, I would definitely like to work together with people like him, smart people like him who are also trying to save Western civilization. But at the same time, I think, yeah, people like him, he needs to accept that those of us who don't necessarily share his faith might also have a rigorous foundation for ethics and for being good. I am skimming here, and I think I'm not going to waste your time, but maybe later I'll go ahead and tweet out for people who are interested, or you know what, I'll put in the description here on YouTube. I'll put in the description if I can find the page where he's talking about the suffragette movement. And he talks about the one woman who wrote this book from an atheist perspective. And he didn't say that she had bad arguments or anything. It was just, well, nobody really followed her anymore because she wasn't religious. And of course, in the late 1800s, that would be true because most people in the United States were religious. I think he said even in the 1950s that 9 out of 10 Americans would describe themselves as some sort of Christian or something. So if that, that was the case, then yeah, atheists, even today, just for being an atheist, if I go on Tucker and Tucker introduces me as an atheist, a lot of people attribute all sorts of baggage to that. They package it with me being a leftist, for example. And I mean, I would just get hell on Twitter when Tucker would introduce me as an atheist. So people have a misunderstanding. Given their context of knowledge, you can understand that they have it. But one of the things that I like to try to do is push that envelope and get people to be more open to the idea of a secular philosophy that can provide a very rigorous system of ethics. There was, this was another, I saw another clip of the ARI series. I saw these little clips going around. There was one in which one of the philosophers is talking about the first being introduced to Rand's philosophy, and it was in the context of the sexual revolution was going on in the 60s or whatever. And someone asked Rand, well, so how do you see yourself in the context of this sexual revolution? She says, oh, we're very chaste. And he's very surprised. What do you mean you're secular, you're atheist? How could you be chaste about sex? And for objectivists, sex plays a very important role, sex and romantic love as an adjunct to the good life. And we take it very seriously as a celebration of life and something that you engage in with only people who, share your values. And it's not, that you just go out and have hedonistic pleasure and everything. And that is, I think that, Ben sees, I think understandably, as a false alternative, that either you have some sort of a religious ethics or you're just out there in scientific materialist way seeking hedonist pleasure. And objectivism rejects both of those because A, we don't have faith. And so we don't have ethics as an out of context duty. And then on the other hand, we reject this idea of just pure physical pleasure. Why? Because that is not going to fuel our capacity for human reason and our ability to sustain our lives over the long term. Some nutty person who threw herself under a horse. Are you talking about the suffragette, Bert, there? I don't know. I don't know enough about the suffragette who he mentioned, the atheist suffragette. Anyway, so I'm about at the end of my hour. I'm going to let you guys go unless you have any questions, but I thank you for tuning in. I want to thank once again Ben Shapiro for joining me for that very short period of time and making, a little bit of progress in this discussion. One of the things that I love seeing out there on the internet in all these discussion shows is this spirit that has, I think, been largely pushed forward by Dave Rubin, this spirit of having, just friendly, good conversations and exchange of ideas between people who disagree about a lot of issues. Civil discourse is such a tremendous value. I think it is an essential component of what I like to refer to, following Rand, as the American sense of life. Part of the American sense of life, which is the way that I would gloss, let's save Western civilization, let's save the American sense of life, let's save the confidence in human reason to be able to exchange ideas, to trade with other people, to leave people free, to not bring force into the equation, to not bring insults and laughter and dismissals and all the hostile stuff that you see out there on Twitter and everything else. Let's see people actually engaging each other in, ideas, in the language of ideas, not in the language of insults, and not just with laughter and gifts that belittle people and all this kind of stuff. And there's so much of that rampant hostility out there. And, like I say, I see it too, and Ben sees it too. Let's, save civil discourse. Let's save civil discourse. And I see, people like Ben, people also, Jordan Peterson is having a lot of wonderful conversations with people. And as I said, Dave Rubin is just a powerhouse with respect to this, having conversations with people of all ideologies, respectful conversations. And he's one of the first people to give more of a platform to objectivists as well, which is great. So anyway, thank you. Thanks again to Ben. And go grab his book, #1 bestseller on Amazon. Check out the Quillette review, gives you a taste. But yeah, this guy demonstrates a breadth of knowledge. I'm really pleased to have had the opportunity to sort of push him to broaden his knowledge a bit more about the philosophy that I think is true objectivism. So thanks, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and go. I'll be back on shows here. I'm about to move and simplify my life a little bit so I can focus more on this sort of stuff. And I'll be back here on YouTube. Please subscribe if you can, and then you make sure not to miss anything. And also check out my blog, don'tletitgo.com. Take care, everybody. I'll talk to you soon.